In Ashi-guruma, you place your foot on your opponent's knee and throw with that as an axis. It's the same principle as Hiza-guruma. Here an Osotogari is followed by Ashi-guruma. First you execute Osotogari. When your opponent responds by withdrawing his left foot, you follow with Ashi-guruma.
足車その1、右に開きながら足を相手の膝に押し当て引き落とします。足車その2、左前隅に崩し、その左膝を封じます。
In Deashi Harai, you sweep away one of your opponent's feet that's moved forward. When your opponent steps forward with his right foot, you open up with your right and sweep using your left foot. Here you sweep the retreating right foot of the opponent who's trying to move back. Here you lead your opponent around and sweep his right foot as he steps forward. This is following on from Hiza-guruma. When you try Hiza-guruma, your opponent reciprocates stepping forward with his right foot. You then sweep away that right foot. In another instance, you release your opponent's hand as he pulls, and using your own hand, bring his foot forward, which you can then sweep away.
出足払い。まさに畳を踏みしめようとするくるぶしの後ろをつま先の方へ押し払い、左手で真下に引き落とします。
There are two ways of performing Hanegoshi Gaeshi. One is a leg technique, whereby you reap the pivotal foot of your opponent, and another is a hip technique, of pushing up with the hip and twisting before countering. At times you hold the opponent's waist and reap your opponent's pivotal foot. With your hip, you bounce your opponent up in a large motion, then throw, twisting with both hands. When bouncing your opponent with your hip, You may at times simultaneously sweep upwards using your leg. In Harai Tsurikomi-ashi, you can throw your opponent by a sweeping blow to the rear of his foot. Here, the right foot of the opponent is swept away as he tries to retreat, and then he's thrown. You slap at the inside of the foot of your opponent as he tries to retreat to destroy his balance towards the tip of his right foot, then sweep him off his feet.
払い吊り込み足。下がる相手の右足を足裏で押し払います。
Hizaguruma is a technique of supporting your opponent's knee with your foot as you throw. As your opponent tries to step forward, place the sole of your foot on his knee. Your opponent will turn and fall in a twisting motion. Hizaguruma performed after transferring your right hand from his left lapel to mid-sleeve. Another method, where your opponent's knee is bent. Step forward, execute the technique as if trying to bend your opponent's knee. He then falls in a twisting motion. Hizaguruma, following on from your opponent's kochi-gari. Raise your attacked foot and follow on with a hizaguruma. This is not kochi-gaishi, however.
その1、前隅に崩し、膝頭に足裏を当てて引き落とします。膝車その2、踏み出す足の膝に足裏を押し当て引き落とします。
Kosoto-gake is a technique of throwing your opponent in a kind of pulling up motion. Sometimes the sole of the foot, At other times, the leg is used for clipping. As the opponent withdraws his left foot, shifting his weight onto his other foot, you make him fall, hooking with your leg. You first try an uchimata, then the moment your opponent tries to defend himself, leaning backward, you turn it into kosotogake. Here you take hold of the rear collar to bring your opponent in close, push him back to go off balance, then hook and make him fall.
小外掛け。右前隅に崩し、引きつけながら相手のくるぶしに足裏を当てて抜き倒します。
Taiotoshi into kosotogari. Dodging your opponent's taiotoshi, make him off balance, standing on both his heels, then cut him down in the direction of his toes using the back of your feet. Your foot will be placed on roughly the same line as your opponent's. When you're clipping, you should do so from your opponent's heels, in the direction of his toes, as if rubbing the surface of the mat. Your opponent should fall suddenly on the spot.
小外刈り。後ろ隅に崩し、足裏を相手のくるぶしに当て刈り倒します。
In Koshi-gari, you pull your opponent's foot forward, then you clip just as his foot comes down on the mat. In this instance, you cut down on the retreating foot of your opponent. Here, Koshi-gari is performed by pulling the opponent off sideways, and here you cause your opponent to open his feet wide and clip after subduing his defense. Another method is to clip holding one of your opponent's feet. You may sometimes turn around once as you take hold of your opponent's foot and make him fall.
小内刈り。足を鎌形にしてくるぶしの上を内側から刈ります。
Oguruma is a technique where you make your throw by turning your opponent around your leg as an axis. Placing your leg near the lower abdomen of your opponent to use as an axis, you turn him around and throw. Execute Hizaguruma, and the moment your opponent counters with his right foot, follow on with a Oguruma.
大車。相手の重心を腰に引きつけ乗せながら右足を伸ばして相手を払い上げます。
Okuri Ashi Harai is a technique where you sweep away both of your opponent's feet as you throw him. You lead your opponent around and sweep away both his feet. In Okuri Ashi Harai, you sweep away both your opponent's feet as they're together. Okuri Ashi Harai performed in 2 steps. You step in and sweep away the retreating foot of your opponent.
送り足払い。真横に動く相手を両足もろとも横一文字に払います。
As your opponent steps in trying to execute Osoto Gari, you instead cut him down at that moment using the same throw. Here the opponent's Osoto Gari is returned after a short delay. As you defend yourself against your opponent's Osoto Gari by pulling back your right foot, you counter with an Osoto Gari. As you defend yourself against your opponent's Osoto Gari by pulling back your left foot, you counter with a twist. As you defend against your opponent's Osoto Gari by pulling back your left foot, you counter as if in Osoto Gaishi. Another example where an opportunity to counter came still later. Pull the right leg of your opponent out, then clip him down the moment it touches the mat. Pull his left leg out and cut down on his right leg. Osoto Gari from a Harai Tsurikomi Ashi. As your opponent advances to defend himself, cut down on his right leg. Another method is to put your arm under your opponent's and holding his waist from the rear to cut him down. Another is to pull your opponent up by the front of his belt and execute a clip upwards. Here you push your opponent's elbow to make him lose balance and cut him down to the rear.
大外刈りその1、相手のひかがみを外から大きく刈り上げます。大外刈りその2、 相手が右足に重心を移した瞬間、ひかがみを刈ります。
In Osoto Guruma, you begin your throw as in Osoto Gari, but cut both your opponent's legs as you twist him down. Sometimes it's done in two movements. In a variation of this, you step behind both your opponent's legs with your right leg and make him fall, as in Tai-otoshi.
大外車。大外刈りをこらえるのをさらばと右足を伸ばし、左足。
Osoto otoshi is made by pushing down your opponent by sliding your leg down his rear waist. In Osoto otoshi, your opponent's foot must be on the matting as you make the sliding clip. Here you see Osoto otoshi made with the opponent's neck on your arm.
大外落とし。相手の後ろ股を右足で上の方からすり下ろしながら倒します。
Is a technique of countering your opponent's ouchi-gari with an ouchi-gari of your own. There are two ways of countering. One is to clip the foot that's clipping you, and the other is to clip your opponent's pivotal foot. Here the opponent's foot is clipped back as he tries to clip you. Here you counter by clipping both your opponent's attacking foot as well as his pivotal foot at the same time. Dodge your opponent's ouchi-gari and counter with a twisting motion. This is also ouchi-gaeshi. Use your opponent's force to return the attack by twisting to the right. First dodging your opponent's ouchigari, then throwing and twisting to your left. Pull your opponent's foot forward, then just as he tries to put his weight on that foot, clip his foot and make him fall. Here the opponent's foot is being clipped as he tries to retreat. Here the opponent is pulled out sideways, then his foot is clipped as if to open it further out. Here the opponent is pulled in close, then clipped the moment he tries to rise up. Here, when the opponent tries to get away by raising his foot, he's pushed forward and cut down off balance. Here, his leg is grabbed as you clip.
大内刈り。足で相手のひかがみを内側から大きく刈り取ります。
Is executed by putting the sole of your foot on your opponent's ankle and throwing with that as the fulcrum. This is when your opponent has stepped forward. This is when you first lightly slap the inside of your opponent's left foot before executing the technique. The aim of this is to destroy your opponent's balance toward the tip of his right foot as you slap his foot from inside. Sasai tsurikomi ashi made to look like o sotogari. When o sotogari is executed, your opponent defends by moving his weight forward in reaction. Turn your body at that moment, support with your foot as you throw. Tsubame Gaeshi is a technique of throwing your opponent by reversing his foot sweep into your own. Shift directly to your right or left. If your opponent attacks with Deashi Harai or Okuri Ashi Harai, you dodge it and turn it into Tsubame Gaeshi. Even when moving back, you can also do likewise.
Tsubame返し。足払いを透かし、足裏を返して払います。
In using the Uchimata technique, you first pull your opponent forward. Then just when his weight shifts to his left foot as he moves forward, you throw by sweeping up from between his legs. Here you jump in to make your throw the moment your opponent withdraws his foot and touches the mat. Pull your opponent forward to make him assume jigotai, or a self-defense position, then jump in and apply uchimata just as he raises himself. This is a method generally known as ken-ken uchimata. You sweep with your left leg to destroy your opponent's balance and throw. And uchimata after having switched feet. The movement is similar to that of harai goshi and oguruma. The method used is to pull your opponent sideways, then sweep up on the leg he steps out on. First you make a move, as in performing ouchigari, then it's transformed into uchimata. In this situation, the objective is to cause your opponent to open up his legs and lean forward off balance. If your opponent defends himself by going down on one knee, he's still judged to be standing, and the uchimata is recognized.
内股。真っ向から飛び込み、後ろ股で相手の内股を押し上げ、真下に。
In Uchimata Gaishi, when your opponent attacks with Uchimata, you counter by cutting back on his pivotal foot. When on the floor, you grasp your opponent's belt to make him bend over. Then, with your arms crossed, grip both lapels to bring him near. Then, standing up on both legs, raise him up at once deftly to the shoulder level. This technique is dangerous if your opponent is dropped after being raised up, so that the effect of the throw was recognized only in 1926. In those days, an ippon was declared when you succeeded in raising your opponent up to the shoulder-high level at one go. But today, the match is suspended with the call of mate. The effect of the technique is not recognized. Hanegoshi is a technique of throwing your opponent by bouncing him up using the movement of your hip and foot. Hanegoshi executed in pursuit. It's made the moment your opponent retreats and brings his left foot down. The leg to be used in bouncing your opponent up should be bent a little. You bounce him up around the lower part of his knee. The technique may be used after guiding your opponent sideways. This is Hanegoshi, where you jump in to execute the technique. Pull your opponent downwards, and when he straightens himself up in reaction, jump in to execute this technique.
跳ね腰。左足を踏み込ませながら相手を腰に引きつけ、右足で跳ね上げます。
In Harai-goshi, you pull your opponent close and throw with your hip and legs in a sweeping motion. The nage no kata form is created by pulling your opponent close by putting a hand under his arm and raising him to destroy his balance. In randori, you seldom put your hand in as shown here. Here the technique is performed by following the motion of your opponent who withdraws. Another chance for using harai goshi presents itself when you pull your opponent out sideways as shown here. The body movement when executing harai goshi varies, as when you crisscross and change the position of your feet. For a moment, your opponent mistakes it for a right-hander technique. Then you turn and go into the motion for harai goshi.
払い腰その1、右手を相手の背に回し、相手の下腹を腰に引きつけ、右足を払い上げながら腰をひねります。払い腰その2、前帯を取り、相手を引きつけ腰をひねって左に払い上げます。
In Koshi-guruma, you grasp your opponent by the neck and throw in a twisting motion with him on your hips. Control your opponent by holding his neck. Place your waist deep under him and push to the side. Koshi-guruma must be executed by holding your opponent's neck.
腰車。相手の首を右手で後ろから巻き、深く入れた腰を軸にして水車を回すように倒します。
In all koshi, you pull your opponent forward with your arm around his waist, then throw on your waist. Move in with your hip low. Make your throw only after your opponent's hip is sufficiently close. With your left hand, pull your opponent out off balance, forward to your left. Bring his waist sufficiently close to place him on your hips. Then, with both elbows outstretched, pull him straight up to throw. With your left hand under your opponent's side, as you come to grapple, pull his waist close and perform ogoshi. Here the opponent's hanegoshi is turned into ogoshi. Pull your opponent's waist close as he attacks with a hanegoshi. Step up close with both your feet and throw using the ogoshi technique. This is not utsurigoshi.
右手を指して相手がつま立つように釣り込み、腰をひねって下から。
There is an application of tsurikomi goshi which is generally called sode tsurikomi goshi. By pulling up your opponent's arm, you destroy his balance. You then have a choice of either taking hold of his sleeve opening like this, or taking hold of the elbow section of his sleeve. When grasping the sleeve opening, you sometimes do so by pushing your opponent's hand away. The throw is made when he comes back with the same hand to grasp your jacket.
飛び腰。相手の跳ね腰に逆らわずに乗りながら相手の腰を後ろに押しやり飛び越して投げます。
In tsurigoshi, you grasp your opponent's belt from behind, then bringing him in close, lift and throw on your hip. You must defend against your opponent's tsurikomi goshi while you grasp his belt from under his arm as you throw. In this form of tsurigoshi, you grasp your opponent's belt over his shoulder. Pulling your opponent forward, you grasp his belt over his shoulder and throw using tsurigoshi. Throwing as you grasp the front part of your opponent's belt is also an application of the tsurigoshi technique. It's called a tsurigoshi only when the belt is grasped in making the throw. This is the kata form of tsurikomi goshi. The moment your opponent protects himself by bending backwards, lower your hips and, making them the fulcrum of your throw, pull him down with both your arms. In randori, you pull your opponent up with both arms and throw him on your hips when moving either forwards or backwards. Take firm hold of the rear of your opponent's jacket when he's bent forward in a defensive posture to throw, pulling him up. This is also tsurikomi goshi. In ukigoshi, you draw your opponent's waist in close using one of your arms, then throw using the twisting motion of your waist. In the practice form, the throw is made as your opponent attacks, as if to strike. In ukigoshi, you throw in a twisting motion after bending back fully, using your left hip as the fulcrum. Your shoulder is placed deep under your opponent's arm, and your arm secures his waist positioned parallel to his belt. Look once again at how you bend your back, how your shoulder should be positioned, and how your waist is twisted.
相手の出鼻を左に回り込んで腰を抱え、前にひねります。
When your opponent attacks with Koshi-waza, you lift your opponent up and throw him down in front of you. This ushiro goshi has developed from the opponent's hane goshi. Ushiro goshi executed just as your opponent tries to defend himself by curling his feet around yours. When changing into ushiro goshi, your opponent may try defending himself by attacking your foot, as in ouchigari. You then lift up the foot that's been attacked, hoist him up, then throw him down. This is in case your opponent defends himself using something like kouchigari. If your opponent defends himself by using kouchigari from inside, lift your foot that's been attacked, hoist him up, and throw him down. When your opponent attacks with osotogari, push his waist up with your leg as you throw him down. Ushiro goshi resulting from your opponent's hane goshi. You can also execute the technique like this without holding your opponent's hip, but simply lifting it up by using your left foot. These different follow-on techniques are all called ushiro goshi.
後ろ腰。払い腰を腰を落として防ぎ、そのまま抱え上げて真下に投げ落とします。後ろ車。相手が後ろから抱え上げようとするのを腰を落として逆に引きつけ、相手の腰を跳ね上げます。
Utsuri-goshi is a kind of technique used when your opponent attacks with Koshi-waza, to raise him up and throw him on your hips. This is an Utsuri-goshi technique which originates from the opponent's hane-goshi. This is Utsuri-goshi, which started out as an uchimata by the opponent. You completely raise your opponent up by the waist and opening outwards, throw after moving him over on your hips. It can also be executed after your opponent attacks with an o-sotogari. In this case, you draw your foot a moment before he executes his o-sotogari.
うつし腰。跳ね腰を跳ね返しながら抱え上げ、素早く腰を打ち返します。岩石落とし。締めに攻め、相手の逃げる隙をついて相手を背負い、頭越しに投げ落とします。
This is ippon seoi nage. You hold and control one of the arms of your opponent as you lift and throw him. Seoi nage with your arm turned. In ippon seoi nage, you sometimes extend one of your legs wide to the outside of your opponent's right leg.
背負い投げその2、相手の右肩を取る一本背負いです。背負い投げその3、相手の左肩を取る一本背負いです。
Kataguruma is a technique in which you haul your opponent up above you as you throw. As you can see, the throw is generally made by throwing your opponent down toward the tip of your foot. In Kataguruma, the throw can be made in any number of directions after you raise your opponent up. In this case, the opponent is thrown directly in front. It appears that this kind of throw was often used in the early days of modern judo. In this kataguruma, the body of the opponent is raised up high, and the throw is then made by bending backwards. The direction of the throws may differ, but these are all considered kataguruma, and the effect of the throw is recognized. Here you enter low on one knee, raise your opponent up, and throw him down. Kataguruma with different forms include this as well. As in Morotegari, you raise your opponent up holding both his legs, then stretching backwards, throw him down. This form is hardly ever seen nowadays, but was apparently one of the techniques in the older schools of jujutsu.
肩車その1、足元低く身を沈め、相手の下腹を引きつけ、右ももを内側から取り担ぎ上げて落とします。肩車その2、左前隅に崩しつつ、その左外側から相手の肩腰の力を封じます。肩車その3、踏み出てくる左足の外側に回り、その足を逆に抱えて抜き上げます。
Kibisgaishi is a technique in which you fell your opponent by taking hold of his heel. There are two ways of performing kibisgaishi. Either by grasping the inside of your opponent's heel, or by grasping the outside. First make seoi nage, then turn once to face your opponent to follow on to kibisgaishi. First, grasping your opponent's heel from outside. Catch your opponent's heel from outside as he tries to withdraw, then cut him down by pushing with your left hand. In the following case too, you grasp the heel from outside. From Koshi-gari, you make your opponent fall by taking the heel of the raised foot from outside. Changing your opponent's hizaguruma into this technique. When your opponent attacks with a hizaguruma, take his heel from outside.
左送り足払いを巧みに反らして体を沈め、片膝をつき相手の右かかとを引き払います。
You dodge your opponent's Koshi-gari, then drop him by twisting to either right or left. When your opponent attacks with a Koshi-gari, you evade by raising the foot that's been struck, then make a throw by twisting him to the left. This time, twisting to the right. Look closely at how you evade the attack and how you make the twist. Kuchiki-daoshi is a technique in which you take your opponent's leg and push him down backwards. It's often used in a tournament. You push your opponent down by taking hold of his leg, but sometimes it's executed from the inside as well as from the outside. In Kuchiki-daoshi, you may simply grasp the other's leg, or you may change it into either from your own or your opponent's technique. Here you turn from seoi-nage and grasp your opponent's leg from inside. This is a follow-on technique starting from kataguruma. A kataguruma is attempted, but as your opponent defends himself by shifting his weight backwards, the throw is made by grasping his leg from inside. This time we start with the opponent's osotogari. When the opponent attacks with osotogari, defend yourself by opening up, turning sideways. As you do so, catch him from inside his legs to make him fall. Here you down your opponent by catching his leg from outside. When you perform Koshi-gari, your opponent counters by raising the foot that's been swept from the side. Grasp his leg from outside at that moment to make him fall. This time, continuing from Ochi-gari. The moment your opponent raises his foot to counter the move, you catch his leg from outside to drop him. Look closely at the movement of the right hand. This is not seoi-nage, but kuchiki-daoshi. A continuous movement is made from a seoi-nage, and your opponent is made to fall with the right hand on the outside of his leg. Turning your opponent's hizaguruma into this technique. Catching the foot of your opponent as he attempts hizaguruma, push him down with your left hand to make him fall. Morotegari is often used in a competition. There are different ways of starting Morotegari. In this case, you catch your opponent the moment you come to grapple with him. This is Morotegari, where you first pull your opponent forward. In this case, Seoi-nage turns into a Morotegari. When you attempt Seoi-nage, your opponent will react by bending backwards. Morotegari is then performed without a pause. In following on from a Seoi-nage, you sometimes make one complete turn, as you can see here. This also is an application of Morotegari. Here you make your opponent fall by grasping one of his feet using both hands.
Morotegari. 不意をついて相手の両ももを正面から抱え抜き上げながら押し倒します。
Obi-otoshi can be considered a kind of screen-nage. It is one of the techniques of Jujutsu, the traditional martial art. Grasp the front part of your opponent's belt. Push him directly back to cause him to lose balance, lift him from the side, and throw him down towards the rear. The principle of Obi-otoshi is very much like that of screen-nage. Obi-otoshi is hardly ever used in modern tournaments, but is one of the techniques used in free exercises of Kodokan Judo.
片手で相手の前帯をつかみ、一方の手で後ろももを前から抱き込みます。
There are two types of Seoi-nage, Morote Seoi-nage and Ippon Seoi-nage. The hands are used differently when lifting your opponent. This is Morote Seoi-nage. Put your right elbow underneath the side of your opponent's body as you lift him. You grasp one side of your opponent's collar and sleeve. The technique used in throwing him is an application.投げその1、相手を背負い肩越しに大きく円を描いて倒します。 Seoi-otoshi is a throwing technique where you take your opponent on your back and pull him straight down. As you throw, you can do so either with one knee or both knees on the floor. seoi otoshi, moving from an ippon seoi nage position. In seoi nage, you throw your opponent by lifting him over, but in seoi otoshi, you throw him by pulling him down over you. Seoi otoshi on both knees. Whether it's seoi nage or seoi otoshi is decided by whether your opponent was lifted or pulled over.
膝をついて真下に引き落とします。
Originally in sukui nage, you first pushed your opponent back to make him lose balance, then lifted him up and threw him in a backward direction. This technique is not at all seen in recent tournaments. In a tournament, the technique of placing a hand underneath your opponent's thigh and lifting him up is often used. When your opponent tries a harai goshi, you should pull your foot back to open yourself up for an attack, then put your hand in from behind your opponent to lift him up and throw him down. Similarly, when your opponent comes at you with an o-sotogari, then you should again put your hand in from behind and throw. Again, when he attempts an uchimata, you can evade his motion, then putting your hand in from behind, transform it into a sukui nage. On occasion, you may throw using your hips as you lift your opponent. Another way is to lift your opponent as he tries a hanegoshi, then throw by brushing aside his pivot leg. This time, the opponent is lifted by putting a hand in from the front. When your opponent tries o-sotogari, pull your foot back, then as you do so, put your hand in from the front and lift him up. Sumi-otoshi is a throwing technique in which you shake your opponent off balance into the rear corner, then throw him by thrusting him down. Using your right hand, You pull up your opponent by grasping his left collar. You make your opponent lose balance by causing him to raise his left foot and shift his weight to his right heel. In another instance, you shift your grip from his left collar to the middle of his sleeve. You then push his elbow up to make him lose balance.
俗に空気投げと呼ばれているこの技は三船銃弾の草案です。自分の足や腰を相手に触れないで倒す方法はないだろうかという着想から生まれました。右後ろ隅に崩しながら身を沈め、巧みにさばく両手の働きに相手はもんどり打って倒れます。
There are various ways of executing Tai-otoshi depending on the situation. This is Tai-otoshi executed by drawing the opponent out, grabbing one side of the collar. Double motion Tai-otoshi. It was executed first of all by lightly kicking the inside of the opponent's foot to make him lose balance. In another instance, you might cross your opponent's arms when executing the throw. By twisting your opponent's arms, his body goes off balance and his resistance is stopped.
その1、腰を沈めながら右足で相手の立ち直りを抑え足元に引き落とします。体落としその2、相手の下がり鼻を捉えて足元に引き落とします。玉車。私たちは足元に物が落ちると本能的にハッとします。この心理を応用して三船銃団は玉車を草案しました。体を相手の足元に捨て、右手で相手の膝を軽く押さえれば頭上高く宙に回転いたします。
When your opponent attacks with Uchi-waza, you move your right foot back, turn and twist. The opponent, losing his target, will only hit empty air and fall, drawing a large arc as he does so. Occasionally, you may raise one of your feet up high to dodge the attack. This also is an application of Uchi-waza Skashi. The uke or passive partner forward, goes down on one knee and pulls him down in front. The aim of practicing kata or form is to make students realize the principle behind the technique. In uki-otoshi, you sometimes step in the moment your opponent steps forward with his left foot, then execute your throw by pulling him off balance to one side of you. When your right hand is grasping the middle of the sleeve like this, you can force him to go off balance by pushing up on his elbow. Have another look. Dodging your opponent's osotogari by pulling back your leg, turn aside and then throw. This is also uki-otoshi.
右に開きながら相手を前隅に崩し、ハンドルを切るように手を働かせます。
Yama-arashi is performed by grasping your opponent's collar and sleeve on the same side, lifting him up as in harai-goshi, then dropping him using the hip. With your right hand placed inside the collar of your opponent, with the thumb inside, push against his right chest. Push your opponent down. Then, just as he tries to raise himself, jump in and throw him. The foot movement is similar to that of Harai-goshi. Your toes should be put close to your opponent's ankle as you brush it upwards. Simultaneously, lift with the right hand while brushing upwards with the right foot, then throw in a large motion upwards.
相手の袖襟を取り、真ん前に崩しつつ引き落とします。